print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Kathy, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 19th issue of the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Charges of assaulting ICE unravel from misconduct. Nearly half of resolved cases have been dismissed, defeated, or withdrawn. This article is by Mike McIntyre, Danny Hakim, Alexandra Berzon, Jasmine Ulloa, and Lauren McCarthy. In its nationwide immigration crackdown, the Trump administration has charged hundreds of people with assaulting or impeding federal agents. President Trump has branded them insurrectionists, animals, and thugs, part of a broader effort by his administration to cast protesters and immigrants as violent criminals. But a close examination of those cases reveals that in its rush to meet White House demands for deportations, federal law enforcement has engaged in extensive misconduct, ranging from attacking protesters to destroying evidence and misrepresenting facts in court. The New York Times found that the Trump administration has filed assault charges against more than 550 people who were caught in its immigration dragnet, far more than previously known. Of the more than 400 cases resolved so far, nearly half have unraveled. Juries acquitted defendants, judges threw out charges, or prosecutors withdrew them. The record is abysmal by the typical standards of federal prosecutions. The Justice Department seldom loses criminal cases, with more than 90% of defendants pleading guilty or being convicted at trial. The Times obtained court filings for every assault case and reviewed hearing transcripts, interviewed witnesses and federal officials, and watched videos of dozens of encounters that led to criminal charges. The review, the most comprehensive to date, suggests that the administration's use of the law has been less about protecting federal agents than about providing legal cover to cow protesters and immigrants into submission. There seems to be a pattern of charges being filed without any merit, said Jimmy L. Arce, a former federal prosecutor in Chicago who served on a commission that investigated immigration raids in the city last year. He added that some defendants were having their speech criminalized by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Earlier this year, the Trump administration dialed back some of its most confrontational tactics, leading to fewer assault charges. But it recently began an aggressive new wave of enforcement, with agents killing 2 immigrants in Texas and Maine. With hundreds of cases resolved, it is now possible to more fully assess the administration's conduct and results. In the half of assault cases that ended in the government's favor, almost all were guilty pleas. The Times analysis of the 213 cases that the government has lost or abandoned found that in dozens of cases, court records and videos show that federal agents were the first to get physical, shoving, tackling, or pepper spraying defendants. Many defendants successfully argue that the assaults they were accused of were actually acts of self-defense. Judges repeatedly chastised prosecutors and immigration agents for misconduct, including distorting facts and withholding evidence. 2 judges found that agents purposely destroyed evidence, including ordering a defendant to delete cell phone photos. Officers charged more than 24 people who were filming or following agents, often while honking car horns, blowing whistles, or shouting warnings like, "La migra is coming." There was no allegation of physical contact with agents. In more than 100 cases, prosecutors did not claim that any agents were injured. In at least 7 other cases, officers' injuries were caused by their or their colleagues' actions. For example, a judge last fall dismissed assault charges against an immigrant, ruling that the agent involved had been cut by shards of glass from a window he himself had smashed. 65 times, prosecutors abandoned or downgraded charges before hitting a deadline to present evidence to a grand jury or judge. Former prosecutors said that this pattern of rapid retreat was unusual and signaled that the case should never have been brought. The Trump administration's strategy hinges on a once obscure statute, 18 U.S.C. 111, that makes it a federal crime to assault or forcibly impede a government officer. Punishments range from a fine to 20 years in prison. For decades, prosecutors used the law sparingly. One exception was when the Biden administration invoked it to charge hundreds of people involved in the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol. Prosecutors had a perfect record of winning convictions in those cases until Mr. Trump returned to office and issued blanket pardons. As the Trump administration's efforts to round up undocumented immigrants encountered resistance last year, officials embraced an expansive reading of the assault statute as a way to arrest and prosecute people who got in the way of ICE and Border Patrol agents. Lauren Biss, a spokesman for the Department of Homeland Security, declined to comment on specific incidents, but said that it should come as no surprise that there's an increase in criminal referrals under 18 U.S.C. 111, as there's been a massive increase in violence and threats against federal law enforcement. Wynn Hornbuckle, a Justice Department spokesman, echoed that. Federal prosecutors are correct to prioritize those prosecutions and hold individuals accountable to the fullest extent of the law, he said, adding that prosecutors sometimes downgraded or dropped charges based on mitigating factors identified in the case. Another Justice Department official said that in some instances, prosecutors dropped charges when defendants were deported. Gregory Bovino, the former Border Patrol commander-at-large, who championed the use of smash-mouth tactics against protesters and immigrants, was blunter. He said in an interview that worthless federal prosecutors chickened out by abandoning assault cases, and he thought more protesters and immigrants should have been prosecuted. We were being overly judicious in who we charged with 18 U.S.C. 111, he said. On occasion, officers were seriously hurt by protesters or immigrants. The Times found last June Robert Carlos Munoz Guatemala, a sex offender in the United States illegally, drove away while a federal agent had an arm inside the car window. The agent, who months later would kill the protester Renee Good in Minnesota, was dragged about 50 yards. Mr. Munoz Guatemala is one of only 4 people in the Times analysis who was convicted by a jury. The other 21 who faced jury trials were acquitted. Nearly 200 others had the charges dismissed, including 2 mothers from Charlotte, North Carolina. We need help right now. Titania Racini and her friend Kristen Roos were cornered. A group of armed men, some wearing masks, had surrounded their car on a dead-end street. The women screamed to a 911 operator for help. Earlier that November morning, the 2 young mothers, friends since college, had been on their way to a Christmas market in Charlotte. They saw a car filled with immigration agents pulling into the parking lot of an outdoor shopping mall. Operation Charlotte's Web, as the immigration sweep in the city was known, followed a bloody and high-profile operation in Chicago. Ms. Racini, 36, and Ms. Roos, 33, were wary of what might happen in North Carolina. Ms. Racini, an American citizen of Ecuadorian descent, and Ms. Roos had been organizing with other local mothers to be on the lookout for immigration agents. So they steered into the parking lot, stopping about 20 yards from the government vehicles. Other protesters were already gathered. They all began yelling at the agents. After a few minutes, the agents moved their vehicles in front of and behind Ms. Racini's Acura SUV, she said. Several agents stepped out. Ms. Roos remembers them shouting at her and Ms. Racini to leave and trying to scare us. The women drove to another part of the parking lot and watched as the agents pinned in another protester's car. The agents eventually drove off, and Ms. Racini and Ms. Roos resumed their trip to the Christmas market, at one point stopping to alert a resident that federal officers were nearby. Soon, the women realized they were being followed by 2 unmarked cars. They called 911. An operator told them to find the nearest gas or police station, but they didn't know where one was. Instead, they wound up on the dead-end street. They turned into a driveway in a housing development. The unmarked cars blocked them in. "We need help right now," Ms. Racini exclaimed to the 911 operator. "They're going to," expletive, "hurt us." Just then, an agent began smashing the driver's side window with the barrel of his rifle, which was pointed toward Ms. Racini, according to footage recorded by a nearby resident. The women were terrified. Their shrieks can be heard on the 911 recording. "We didn't do anything," Ms. Racini said. "Yes, you did," an agent responded. "You impeded 18 U.S.C. 111, driving erratic." Lawyers said that that was a misreading of the statute, which specifies that it applies when people use or threaten force. "It's not enough to show that they might have been interfering with what was happening," said Carissa Hessick, a University of North Carolina law professor. Ms. Racini and Ms. Ruse were led from the car, and their hands were zip-tied behind their backs. One agent noticed a child seat in Ms. Racini's car and sarcastically remarked that she must be a stellar mother, she recalled. Ms. Racini retorted that she was, in fact, a stellar mother, which was why she was protesting against agents who she thought were breaking up families in her community. The women were taken to the local FBI building, where they spent several hours in confinement and eventually received tickets accusing them of violating 18 U.S.C. 111. Mr. Bovino, who was running the Charlotte operation, shared a social media post from a far-right account that called the women liberal terrorists, and he praised what he called excellent arrests for assault. Yet the charges were so weak that the U.S. Attorney's Office in Charlotte eventually withdrew them. Asked about the agent's use of a rifle muzzle to smash Ms. Racini's window, Mr. Bovino said he wasn't concerned about the risk to the car's occupants. "I'm more worried about the officer getting hurt or killed, or the public getting hurt or killed, not necessarily the suspect," he said. Shoved by Bovino. Mr. Bovino's crackdown soon moved to Minneapolis. On January 7th, hours after Miss Good was killed, Quentin Williams, a special education assistant at a high school about 3 miles away, was helping direct students to their rides after school. He spotted a group of federal agents who had come onto campus while arresting someone. Mr. Williams moved toward a crowd that had gathered to watch. Some were yelling at or filming the agents. Mr. Bovino ran up and shoved Mr. Williams, videos show. In an ensuing skirmish, agents yanked Mr. Williams by the hair, tackled him, and, he said, choked him. "I could not help but think of George Floyd," Mr. Williams wrote later that day, memorializing the incident. "I was so scared for my life." Mr. Bovino said Mr. Williams was among a group of rioters and anarchists who failed to follow orders from law enforcement. Mr. Williams was arrested, taken to a federal building, and released that same day. Agents told him they'd be in touch. About 2 weeks later, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minneapolis charged Mr. Williams and 15 others for violating 18 U.S.C. 111. Pam Bondi, then the Attorney General, announced the charges on social media, posting photos of Mr. Williams and other shackled defendants, who she said were resisting and impeding our federal law enforcement agents. She cited the statute but left out its language about it applying when people forcibly interfere. In a sworn affidavit, an investigator from the Department of Homeland Security said that an agent at the scene had seen Mr. Williams trying to grab and pick up a Border Patrol agent, a claim that Mr. Williams denied and that was not supported by video of the incident that the Times reviewed. The U.S. Attorney's Office later reduced the charge to a misdemeanor and ultimately dropped the case altogether. The Times identified numerous other cases in which people were charged with assault, even though officers were the ones who appeared to have used physical force first. One involved Jaime Diaz, an undocumented Honduran man who was arrested last July during a traffic stop in Laredo, Texas. Prosecutors charged him with assault, saying he had struck a Border Patrol officer 2 to 3 times. But during his trial, body camera video showed that Mr. Diaz, who was slightly built and under 5 feet tall, had not gotten physical with the officer. Instead, the officer had grabbed him by the neck, forced him to the ground, and punched him as he tried to handcuff him. A federal jury acquitted Mr. Diaz in November. He was then scheduled for deportation. In the past, this officer could have been prosecuted based on the body cams, said his lawyer Roberto Bali, and instead we have my client being prosecuted. A spokesman for the U.S. Attorney's Office in South Texas said that Mr. Diaz elbowed an agent. The jury did acquit the defendant, but it was a righteous prosecution, she said. In more than 20 cases that the government lost or abandoned, protesters and immigrants argued that what the government said was assault was instead self-defense. Last May, Josefina Gabriel Lopez, a Guatemalan immigrant, was pulling into her driveway in Biloxi, Mississippi, when federal agents suddenly approached and ordered her out of the car. Caught erasing evidence. The Times identified more than 30 instances of judges criticizing prosecutors or federal agents for conduct such as destroying or withholding evidence, violating rules about communications with jurors, and making false or exaggerated claims, including some disproved by videos. Judges have denounced the government's actions as flagrant, in bad faith, and shocking to the universal sense of justice. One case of evidence being destroyed took place last September in San Bernardino, California. Federal agents were following a Nicaraguan man, Joseph Blandon Savdera, who was driving to work in a Toyota Corolla. At an intersection, the agents boxed him in with their two cars, smashed his window, and arrested him. All three vehicles were damaged. Mr. Blandon Savdera said the agents had hit his car when they cut him off, but the government said he had rammed them, and prosecutors charged him with 2 counts of assaulting officers with his sedan. Mr. Blandon Savdera's lawyers asked that the cars be preserved so their expert could examine them, but agents immediately repaired one of theirs. The judge dismissed the count tied to the repaired vehicle, calling the agent's actions part of a growing pattern of mishandling evidence that might undermine officers' assault claims. Prosecutors appealed the dismissal. The count related to the other government vehicle is pending. In April, a federal judge in Los Angeles threw out assault charges against 2 protesters in the middle of a trial after finding that prosecutors had failed to turn over internal use of force reports that could have been helpful to the defense. A month later, the government dropped charges against 6 protesters in Chicago after a judge criticized prosecutors for having mishandled a grand jury, partly by speaking to jurors outside the courtroom. In Laredo, Ariana Guadalupe Garcia, a 19-year-old American, arrived at a border crossing last July to meet her young niece. Ms. Garcia, who had come from the U.S. side, had clothes for the girl to bring back to a relative in Mexico to sell, a common exchange at border crossings. But Ms. Garcia found that the girl, who had arrived from Mexico, was being held in an inspection area, and when she tried to speak to her through a window, an officer told her to leave. Ms. Garcia did not immediately obey, prompting several other officers to approach her. After some back and forth, the officers began escorting Ms. Garcia away, according to court records. As they passed through a short stretch of walkway with no working security cameras, Ms. Garcia took at least one photo with her phone. An officer swatted it away. Prosecutors said that Ms. Garcia then hit an officer on the arm and another in the ear, which she denied. She was arrested and later charged with assault. Afterward, an officer told her to delete the photo she'd just taken, going so far as to watch her permanently erase it from the recently deleted folder. The case against Ms. Garcia began to fall apart when the judge asked how prosecutors intended to prove she had hit anyone, especially since security footage from right before the alleged incident showed no sign of her acting violently toward the 4 male officers. The deleted photos were the final straw. The government acted in bad faith in destroying the evidence, the judge wrote, further demonstrating that Ms. Garcia's constitutional rights have been violated. A compelling distraction at the perfect time. World Cup provided an abundance of good vibes, by James Poniewozik. I'm not a sports guy. That is not to say I'm a sports hater. I'll watch the occasional tennis final, an Olympics curling match, and the Michigan-Ohio State game in November, but I don't have the bandwidth to truly follow any sport. The athlete cameos in Super Bowl ads sail over my head. In my Learned League trivia matches, the questions about Premier League soccer, there are more of them than you might think, always spell my doom. But the summer of 2026 has done strange things to the least sportsy among us. If you live in New York, as I do, you may have spent a lot of time rewatching the Knicks' OG Anunoby, reaching for that NBA Finals tip-in like Michelangelo's God giving life to Adam, reminding us that we could actually have good things. Then the World Cup came ashore in North America, and lo, we had the show of the summer. The broadcasts are pulling American football ratings, and setting records even in games not involving the U.S. team. This summer has felt as if the whole tense world were exhaling and taking a collective play break. I can resist sports, but I can't resist vibes. I started dipping into matches in the group stage. Also, I learned what a group stage is. I read up on Cape Verde and became willing to lay down my life for that country. Now I am that guy, glued to my phone in the passenger seat during a car ride, watching little red Norwegian dots try to maneuver around a swarm of tiny white English dots. Now I am setting calendar reminders for games between countries I will probably never visit. Now I am a fan of a sport? I do not mean to imply that I am suddenly sports knowledgeable. I supported Morocco because my mother was born and raised there. I know nothing more about the team than that, and I will not be taking further questions on the subject. I learned a smattering of terms from Ted Lasso. To invert the Supreme Court ruling on pornography, I know what offside is, but I don't know it when I see it. The broadcast industry is well aware of me and my fellow bandwagon jumpers. Will Ferrell even made a Lay's commercial for us, and it has taken measures to make our eyeballs comfortable. To the true fans out there, I apologize. People like me are, I assume, the reason for the numerous patronizing football, hockey, and basketball analogies made by the Fox Sports team to try to translate soccer for the Yanks. If it's any consolation, they don't help me understand the game any better. And these concessions seem unnecessary and dated, given the enormous growth in American soccer fandom. Even Hank Hill, on the Hulu revival of King of the Hill, loves soccer now. Many purists much prefer the announcing on Telemundo, which makes the radical assumption that its soccer audience likes the game. The actual play-by-play has kept my less than expert eye where it needs to be. The annoyances creep in at the edges, the hydration breaks that lubricate the ad sales machine, the enigmatic match momentum chart, the cringe-inducing pleas from the Fox booth for American fans not to bail after the U.S. team was eliminated by Belgium. And no amount of newfound fandom can make me enjoy the repurposed celebrity stunt comedy of James Corden on the Fox After Show. Though, as usual, he seems to enjoy his own antics enough for everyone. The best entertainment lies in the fans, sporting goofy hats in the stands, discovering Costco and Buc-ee's in social media videos, proving that fun is a universal language. The sea of Norway fans doing their viral Viking row after a win, heaving and hoeing in unison to the rhythmic thump of a drum, is a special effect that House of the Dragon can't match. The play makes the cup, but the people make the world. I don't mean this in the naive sense that the World Cup brings us all together and makes us forget our differences. Clearly, it doesn't. It's a competition often heightened by national rivalries and decades-old conflicts. There are wars across the globe, including the one between the United States and Iran, whose team was shunted across the border to Mexico between games. There was the presidential intervention into an American red card and homophobic chants by Mexican fans, and all these controversies were treated gingerly, if at all, on air. Still, this cup feels like the show we needed when we needed it. This is a time when countries, on this continent and elsewhere, are putting up barriers, coveting their neighbors' land, casting suspicions on outsiders, and guarding against perceived threats to their ethnic heritage. The low-stakes delights of this cup suggest that maybe it's actually good when people cross borders and mingle, bringing their cultures and silly customs to the party. Not everyone can afford the airfare and tickets, of course. The images I love most from the Cup are the cutaways to the watch party crowds of ordinary fans around the world thronging together, tensing up and exploding in cheers, transported by the same game that we're watching. We live in the age of algorithmic feed, the personalized stream, the customized media experience. But occasionally, Marshall McLuhan's global village manages to reconstitute itself. There is still a power to these rare moments when live TV pulls us into a virtual stadium that exists everywhere at once, with a capacity of billions. The stadium will empty out soon. The cruel reality of an event like this for the bandwagoner is that the more deeply you get into the games, the fewer games there are left. Am I going to need to figure out how to watch the Premier League? Yamal, Spain's young star, personifies a changing nation, by Jason Horowitz. Rocafonda, Spain. Shortly before Spain's soccer team won a place in the World Cup final, the grandmother of the team's 19-year-old star player, Lamine Yamal, sat on a playground bench watching children of North and West African descent kick around balls. This was the place, she said, where her grandson, the child of a Moroccan father and an Equatorial Guinean mother, first honed his skills. It is also where his portrait, spray-painted onto a wall behind the goal, now looms over a neighborhood that lionizes him. Yet as hundreds of Spaniards, many wearing his name on their backs, made their way to a nearby park to watch him play on a big screen, his grandmother, Fatima Romani, remembered a time when Spaniards showed less love for him. After he scored a goal as a child, Romani recalled, she could hear the taunts of Spaniards around them. "Bloody Moor, look at the black guy." Many things have happened to him, she added, wearing a navy hijab and leaning on a wooden walking stick. Her voice went quiet as another from more than 20 grandchildren consoled her in the family's hometown, Rocafonda, about an hour outside Barcelona. Then her eyes welled when she considered how far her grandson, and also Spain, had come. "It has changed a lot," said Romani, who said she was in her early 70s. As Yamal, who still wears braces, prepares for the biggest game of his life on Sunday, he is also at the heart of a national debate about what it means to be Spanish and whether the country is changing too much, too fast, or not enough. This past week, Yamal, whose full name is Lamine Yamal Nasrue Ebana, said that the ultimate purpose of soccer was to bring people together, adding that Spain and the Spanish team was an example of integration. He was responding in a news briefing to a question about a column by Mariano Rajoy, a conservative former prime minister of Spain. Rajoy had written that the French team, which has many players of African descent, was a team without French people. Yamal's response was interpreted as a criticism of the implication that players of immigrant background do not completely belong to the countries that they play for. In countries like France and Spain, where the children of non-white immigrants sometimes struggle to penetrate the establishment, soccer provides a rare opportunity to become national icons. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Yamal, born and raised in Spain, has also felt the sting of anti-Muslim slurs in soccer stadiums. Spanish fans, who almost certainly knew that their star player was Muslim, tried to motivate the crowd to jump up and down in a game against Egypt this year by chanting, "You're a Muslim if you don't jump." That prompted Yamal to lament ignorant, racist fans who were disrespectful to Muslims. He has also faced criticism from Moroccan fans who felt betrayed by Yamal's playing for Spain and not Morocco, where his father was born. Those reactions reveal broader tensions in a transforming society in Spain. The country, which still rules enclaves in North Africa, some of the last vestiges of a once sprawling empire, has long been a landing point for African migrants seeking work and sanctuary in Europe. It is also a magnet for Spanish-speaking migrants from Latin America. More than 4 million immigrants have arrived in the last 5 years to a country of less than 50 million people. This year, more than 1 million immigrants came out of the shadows after the government invited them to regularize their status. The left-wing Prime Minister of Spain, Pedro Sanchez, has argued that immigrants lift the country's economy, buoy its low birth rate, and inject dynamism into its culture. Many soccer aficionados say that players like Yamal and his teammate Nico Williams, who was born in Spain to Ghanaian parents, reflect an increasingly multicultural and increasingly successful Spain and Spanish team. But that is far from a universal view. While most of Spain's immigrants come from Latin America and speak the language and often have the same religion, Morocco accounts for more immigrants to Spain than any other country, and many Spaniards are not happy about it. Right-wing anti-immigrant parties have surged in recent years, feeding on fears and grievances over Muslim arrivals. At times, they have focused on Yamal, including after he prostrated in a moment of worship after scoring a goal in an early World Cup match. Revuelta, a far-right-wing youth organization closely associated with the far-right party Vox, posted the image on social media with a warning. Whoever tolerates Islam for the sake of a goal will one day have neither a national team nor a nation. For many on the far right, Yamal's hometown, Rocafonda, is a foreboding example of what Spain will look like if Muslims and Africans keep coming and traditional Spanish identity fades. On streets named after Miro and Picasso, Spanish flags are draped over Arabic groceries. Women in hijabs shoot the breeze behind their toddlers. Men watch the game in a packed cafe, and struggling migrants rent rooftops and sleep under laundry lines. Violence is not unusual. In 2024, Yamal's father, who was fined for knocking off the glasses of a Vox activist campaigning for deportations, was stabbed on a Rocafonda street. Despite that, Yamal is proud of his hometown, often celebrating a goal by using his fingers to form the number 304, part of the neighborhood's postal code. So is his grandmother, who made her life here after arriving alone from Morocco, she said, more than 40 years ago. She was unable to read or write at the time, but worked constantly to pay the rent, pay the electricity, pay the water, and to feed her 6 children, including Yamal's father. The soccer star's earliest years were spent in a first-floor apartment here with his father, his mother, and 7 other family members, including his grandmother. His parents eventually split, and he lived elsewhere with his mother, but he returned on weekends and remained close to his grandmother. She taught him, he once said, to smile a lot. Much has changed for Yamal, but also, Romani said, for the neighborhood. It's Morocco, she said, with a laugh in the playground. Don't say that, her granddaughter, Yamal's cousin, Huda El Abudali, chastised her with a smile. It's okay, hombre, Romani said, using a Spanish term of endearment. It's not bad, it's good, she said of the area's multiculturalism. Around Rocafonda, in Middle Eastern groceries and the halal butcher shop, on street corners and playgrounds, Yamal is a hero. El Abdoulaye said that Yamal represented more than just an immigrant enclave in a corner of the country. He is the face of Spain, she said. But many in the neighborhood also acknowledged that Yamal is 1 in 50 million. El Abdoulaye is perhaps a more relatable face for the changing Spain. Like Yamal, she is also the child of immigrants, also 19, also with braces. Unlike Yamal, she is studying administration and finance in preparation for college and living a normal teenage life, hanging out with Black and Moroccan and born and bred Spaniard friends, she said. Her grandmother showed off her lock screen image of Yamal and El Abdoulaye arm in arm as little children and became visibly moved about both their accomplishments. She put her granddaughter's study habits on equal footing with the ball skills of one of the world's greatest soccer players. The young woman could, Romani said, do whatever she wants. As Spain's semifinal game was about to begin, the two women returned home to watch with extended family. The teenagers playing soccer nearby joined thousands of others watching the game at a park. There, a television channel broadcast live from the city of Yamal, and the park filled with white Spaniards and those of African descent. When Yamal drew a foul that resulted in the game's first goal, the crowd erupted. Bilal El Kanoufi, 15, who wore a Spain team jersey, was ecstatic. He played the position of right wing, like Yamal, but was also realizing that maybe he wasn't quite as good as his idol and was focusing on his math classes. Soon after, the crowd lost its collective mind when Yamal scored what would have been Spain's third goal, and then booed lustily when the referee took it away because he had been offside. Back in the Yamal family home, Romani complained vigorously at the television set. But victory seemed certain. Watching in the park, Mariam Dramé, 18, wore a red Spain jersey with her hijab. She recounted how, as the child of Gambian parents, she had endured frequent racist taunts to go back to your country as she went to school to get her nursing degree. She saw Yamal as a source of pride for those of us whose parents are immigrants. With victory at hand, the crowd waved Spanish flags and began embracing. The final whistle blew. Everyone jumped. "I am Spanish," the crowd sang in unison. "Spanish, Spanish." Should Epstein's friends face consequences? An elite Harvard club is torn. By Deborah Kameen. Moguls, models, and members of Broadway's elite gathered in New York City in March 2014, raising glasses in their black tie best to toast a centuries-old student organization affiliated with Harvard University. The club's chair, Andrew Farkas, a billionaire and Harvard alumnus, posed with celebrities and then took the podium to welcome the evening's guests. Among them, in a place of honor, was a table for Jeffrey Epstein. Mr. Epstein had donated so much to the organization, the Hasty Pudding Institute, that he was listed that year as a significant sponsor and granted a table for 8 guests, despite having been a convicted sex offender 6 years earlier. Mr. Epstein opted not to attend the fundraising dinner. He notably avoided social events outside his own home, but he sent a contingent of evening gown-clad young women in his place, according to emails released this year by the Justice Department. "Sorry I won't be at your dinner. Take care of my puppies," Mr. Epstein wrote to Mr. Farkas, who responded, "I will miss you. Your puppies will have a ball. Tell them to come to me after the party." The two men had a long devoted friendship, which Mr. Epstein used to maintain a foothold at Harvard years after the school banned him from making philanthropic gifts in 2008. Now, Mr. Farkas and the student institution he has led for over a decade have incited anger among some of Harvard over accountability for Mr. Epstein's crimes. The controversy taps into a broader debate about whether Mr. Epstein's friends and associates should face consequences for having maintained ties with him after his criminal behavior was known. The Hasty Pudding Institute of 1770 is an idiosyncratic cultural organization made up of the nation's oldest social club, a theater ensemble, and an a cappella troupe. With its long history and elite status, membership to the roughly 150-person club is invitation only. The Institute has no real peers, even among the nation's most selective schools. It has deep ties to American history, politics, Broadway, and Hollywood. 5 U.S. presidents have been members. The club, which operates independently from Harvard University, is governed by a 5-member board of unpaid alumni volunteers and raises its own funds. Still, after Harvard banned his donations, Mr. Epstein saw the organization as a central way to stay connected to the school. Mr. Farkas, who has been Hasty Pudding's chair since 2012, was his main conduit. he solicited at least $375,000 for the Institute from Mr. Epstein between 2013 and 2019. Mr. Farkas has never been accused of any criminal behavior or charged with any crime. But some students and alumni say Hasty Pudding should cut ties with him because of his friendship with Mr. Epstein. At least 175 people, including dozens of professors, at least 3 current or former department heads, and all of the student leaders of Hasty Pudding theatricals from the past academic year, have signed 3 petitions circulating over the last several months. The petitions demand that Mr. Farkas be removed from Hasty Pudding's leadership and ask for Harvard to strip the Farkas name from a campus building that houses Hasty Pudding and university classrooms. Hasty Pudding's leadership and Harvard administrators have not addressed the demands, except to point out that Hasty Pudding is technically separate from the university. James Chisholm, a spokesman for Harvard, said that the university played no role in its management or governance. The university said it had not received any official requests to remove the name from the building, referencing a formal renaming process that was recently instituted by the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Other universities, when faced with similar calls to cut ties with donors who knew Mr. Epstein, have also declined to sever ties with them. In 2011, Mr. Farkas gave an endowment, the amount was not disclosed, for the brick Georgian Revival building that houses Hasty Pudding's theater productions, as well as the school's theater, dance, and media department. In return, Harvard renamed the structure Farkas Hall, an honor Mr. Farkas said he had chosen for his father, Robin Farkas, a businessman and Harvard alumnus who died in 2018. Mr. Farkas is also a critical investment partner for Harvard. He has overseen investments, which have not previously been reported, that are worth tens of millions of dollars for the university, according to Tax and Securities and Exchange Commission documents. The documents show several dedicated investment entities created and managed by Mr. Farkas, but owned entirely by the university, including a private commercial real estate vehicle created for the school in 2014 with a $10 million seed donation from Harvard. Tax documents show that Harvard has also invested directly with Mr. Farkas's larger company. Many elite universities have endowments funded by investments tied to their graduates. At Harvard, more than 70% of investments are with funds managed by alumni. Representatives for Harvard, when asked about its investments with Mr. Farkas, said that the school did not publicly disclose its individual investments or managers. Through a representative, Mr. Farkas said that his company fully complied with all disclosure requirements and did not discuss client investments. In a statement, Mr. Farkas said he was proud to support Harvard and Hasty Pudding, adding, "Naming Farkas Hall after my late father is always and always will be one of my proudest moments." Evan Neerman, chief executive of the public relations firm Red Banyan, said that the release of the Epstein files had created a major reputational hazard for both public figures, as well as more private individuals who merely intersected with Epstein. His firm does not represent Mr. Farkas, but has represented several people who crossed professional paths with Mr. Epstein. He argued that people should not be punished for being convicted in the court of public opinion. Guilt by association has run rampant, he said. But some members of the Harvard community say Mr. Farkas is different. Aidan Golub, an alumnus and former member of Hasty Pudding's theater group, argued that Mr. Farkas's friendship to Mr. Epstein and the evidence in the files should disqualify him from leading the institute. "There needs to be acknowledgement of an awful mistake," he said in an interview, adding, "There needs to be accountability." Mr. Farkas's ties to Mr. Epstein first came to light in 2019, shortly before the sex offender's suicide in a New York City jail, when it was reported that the duo shared ownership of a marina in St. Thomas, a few miles north of Mr. Epstein's private island. Mr. Farkas has sought to downplay the friendship, but thousands of emails and dozens of photographs recently released by the Justice Department show they were close, sharing deep confidences, influential political contacts, and crude misogynistic jokes. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Mr. Farkas was one of only a small handful of friends who traveled to Palm Beach to visit Mr. Epstein during his 13-month jail sentence for sex crimes in Florida in 2008 and 2009. As Mr. Farkas's connections to Mr. Epstein have become public, some members of Harvard's community have written letters urging Harvard to reconsider its relationship with Mr. Farkas. They have resigned in protest from boards and made statements to the news media. In February, undergraduates in the theatrical group gathered 42 signatures demanding Mr. Farkas resign as chair. In the past 3 weeks, 2 new petitions, one from affiliates of the Theater, Dance, and Media Department and one from Hasty Pudding alumni, were sent to the Hasty Pudding Board and the president of the university. The pleas are not new. Multiple faculty members sent letters in 2021 when Mr. Farkas's connections to Mr. Epstein were first emerging. Several students and alumni interviewed for this article said the club had not responded to their concerns. One alumnus, a film producer named Michael Roif, resigned from the Hasty Pudding Theatricals Advisory Panel in frustration. In an interview, Mr. Roif said Mr. Farkas and the Hasty Pudding Board had rebuffed his pleas for them to address the organization's connections to Mr. Epstein. In an email, Mr. Farkas refers to the pressure as a witch hunt. The idea seemed to be that we should stay quiet because his money helps the thing exist, Mr. Roif said. Hasty Pudding's governing board did not reply to multiple emails requesting comment. A university spokesman said Harvard was reviewing its ties to Mr. Epstein, including some donors, but did not elaborate. Documents don't back up assertions about election vulnerabilities. By Julian E. Barnes and Maggie Haberman, Washington. President Trump said his address on Thursday night was about building public confidence in American elections, but he spent much of his speech undermining them. A broken election system is one of Mr. Trump's most common refrains, dating to early 2016. Great damage has been done to our country, the president said. Our elections were left vulnerable to being rigged and stolen, and the trust of the American people was lost. This cannot be allowed to continue. But documents Mr. Trump released to support his claims, and previous assessments from the intelligence community, do not back up his most aggressive statements about election security. In fact, some of those documents reach the opposite conclusion. They also do not contain significant new revelations about vulnerabilities in the country's election systems. One of the documents posted on the White House website was blunt. We assessed that vote tabulation systems would be difficult to manipulate on a wide enough scale to compromise election results. Trump called for bolstering protections he has dismantled. Mr. Trump called for fixing vulnerabilities in electronic voting system so that we can never watch a stolen election again. If you look at voting today, it's in such bad shape in so many states, Mr. Trump said, and we are committing to fix it, and we are also committing to be working with those states and local jurisdictions to help them fix and patch known technical vulnerabilities before the midterm elections. But Mr. Trump has spent the first part of his second term dismantling the election protections built up over previous years. The FBI's task force on foreign influence was shut down. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence sharply cut back a task force that warned against foreign meddling, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has been gutted. And Mr. Trump has appointed an heir to a housing fortune with no relevant experience as the interim director of national intelligence. Grains of truth were blown out of proportion. Mr. Trump described a series of allegations about voter interference in the 2020 vote. He said that China had bought, stolen, or hacked tens of millions of voter data files across 18 states. And he attacked a deep state conspiracy that he said was aimed at suppressing the information. Yet those responsible for sounding the alarm instead kept the information secret and hidden, Mr. Trump said. They did not disclose to me as president or to anyone else, and to the best of our knowledge, they did not inform Congress. It is true that the documents show an intense debate among intelligence officials about alerting their superiors. But U.S. intelligence and congressional officials have long known that China obtained voter data, publicly available information often purchased by political campaigns. What's more, former intelligence officials have said China gathered the data not to manipulate voting results, but instead to better craft influence campaigns to shape voters' perceptions. While the documents outline some nascent interest by Chinese officials in influence operations, they concede Beijing never endorsed any broad-based effort to undercut Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump also referred to a report about Venezuela showing it could successfully tamper with voting machines. John Solomon, who was leading Mr. Trump's task force on declassifying documents on a range of issues, told reporters outside the White House that the intelligence community documents show no evidence that votes in election machines were changed in the past 3 elections. What about Russia? Rallying against the FBI and intelligence agencies' investigations into Russian meddling in 2016 is one of Mr. Trump's favorite themes. And in 2020, a majority of intelligence officials assessed that the Russian campaign to denigrate Joseph R. Biden Jr. was the most robust. At the time, John Ratcliffe, then the Director of National Intelligence, disagreed with that view and argued that career intelligence officials had downplayed China's efforts. But Mr. Trump barely mentioned Russia in his speech on Thursday, using most of it to lament Chinese efforts to denigrate him. Mr. Trump's approach to Russia has long been to treat its president, Vladimir V. Putin, as a peer, and his Justice Department is currently pressing ahead with an investigation into a possible grand conspiracy by Democrats to tie the president to Russia. Mr. Trump appeared to allude to such a conspiracy with a non sequitur about burn bags, which are used to get rid of government documents that no longer need to be saved, and former President Barack Obama. He repeated a demand for voting restrictions before the midterms. For weeks, Mr. Trump has been pressuring Congress to pass a broad election bill to curb mail-in voting, provide documentary proof of citizenship, and show photo identification to vote. Mr. Trump ended his speech with a call to Congress to pass it, despite Republican resistance. Addressing this crisis of election security demands that Congress must pass the Save America Act, Mr. Trump said. The only reason you would not do it is you want to cheat, because your policies are so bad and your candidates are so pathetic. But the problems Mr. Trump focused on in his speech, allegations that foreign governments are mounting influence campaigns or could potentially hack local election authorities, have almost nothing to do with the measures that are part of the bill. And the lack of focus on anything else forward-looking underscores how little Mr. Trump's interest in elections is about the ones still to come compared to the ones he has already faced. Taylor Farms expands lettuce recall to 27 states, by Christina Jewett and Julie Cresswell. Taylor Farms announced late Friday that it was recalling iceberg lettuce that had been shipped to retailers in 27 states because it was potentially contaminated with Cyclospora, a parasite that can cause severe illness, including vomiting, cramping, and explosive diarrhea. Although the investigation by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention tied the parasite to lettuce that Taylor Farms shipped to Taco Bell in 5 states, the company's recall notice suggests far broader distribution of potentially contaminated greens. The announcement listed 8 brand codes but did not say what they stood for. The company did not immediately respond to questions about them on Saturday morning. The recalled products were shipped starting June 29th through as recently as Thursday and have expiration dates through August 3rd. The company said on social media that no Taylor Farms branded salad kits were involved, but did not provide a list of the restaurants or grocers that may have sold its iceberg lettuce, which was mixed with romaine in some products. At this time, Taylor Fresh Foods has not publicly provided distribution information or a list of customers who received the product that was voluntarily removed from the market, the Food and Drug Administration said in a recall notice. FDA regulations do not require the company to do so, a source of frustration for food safety leaders. Food safety advocates have urged FDA over the years to make this a requirement, said Sandra Eskin, the executive director of Stop Foodborne Illness. Without this essential information, a recall is not going to be effective. She added, the whole point is to quickly identify the product and make sure no one else eats it. States listed as part of the recall included Florida, Illinois, Texas, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, North Carolina, Missouri, and others. The recall notice does not list California or New York, but it is unclear if Taylor Farms supplied lettuce to companies in states affected by the recall that then distributed it widely. Sysco, the nation's largest food distributor, said in an emailed statement Friday evening that it was withdrawing all iceberg lettuce products from Mexico in its supply chain at the request of Taylor Farms. We will continue to actively monitor the situation and work with regulators as needed, the company said, adding that it stopped selling and distributing those Taylor Farms products on Thursday. So far, at least 1,645 people have fallen ill and 141 have been hospitalized, most of them after consuming the lettuce sent to Taco Bell, which said it has removed all of the lettuce from its restaurants. The CDC made that determination through scientific detective work, starting with case reports about people who fell ill and tracing it back to a common food source. The case count is likely to rise as the CDC factors in the scope of the recall. The United States is on track to have more cyclospora cases in 2026 than in any previous year. The agency said it's investigating more than 5,100 additional illnesses that may have been caused by the parasite, which is transmitted through water or food contaminated with feces. On Thursday, Taylor Farms executives met with the White House and the FDA to try to distance the company from the outbreak and air concerns about the official investigations into the outbreak. On Friday, the company said the information the FDA presented led to it remove its iceberg lettuce from the market. The company says its Mexican processing plant, Taylor Farms de Mexico in Guadalajara, was voluntarily removing all iceberg lettuce grown in central Mexico. The FDA is planning to inspect the Guadalajara facility in coming days to determine how the cyclospora parasite got on the lettuce and track it through the supply chain. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 19th issue of the front section of the New York Times. We read from the front section of the New York Times every Sunday at 1 p.m. Your reader has been Kathy. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times opinion page. Following that at 3 o'clock, the New York Times Arts and Leisure, and at 4 o'clock, a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Radio Reading mails out a large print program schedule to our listeners every other month. If you have not received a Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service large print program schedule in the mail, please call us at 716-821-5555. We will make sure that you receive one every other month. A Braille version of the schedule is also available upon request. Our number again is 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability